Welcome to the third of 4 seminars for coming together as a community, building resilience after a tragedy. And this was developed from the Lyda Hill Institute for Human Resilience at UCCS. So welcome, everyone. So today we'll be discussing stress injuries and healing. My name is Lauren Shaw, and I am the GRIT Program Manager at the Lyda Hill Institute for Human Resilience. And as I mentioned before, you're welcome to share any comments or ask any questions. However, please know that this is being recorded so that we may be able to share it with our community. And again, I am happy to, I take no offense at anybody interjecting or whatever. It's really hard on these virtual presentations to know, just sort of gauge where you're at with everything. And maybe I can't see your faces. And so sometimes I see thinking faces and I like to call you out, so I don't get to see that. So please feel free to interject if you're comfortable doing so. Okay, so when we think about stress, oftentimes we think about stress as being, sort of an all or nothing thing. So we're either stressed or we're not stressed. But there's actually, stress is really dynamic, and there's actually several layers to stress. And so we're going to actually talk about that to begin with. And so we have about 4 layers, different layers of stress. So if we're looking at this graphic here, we see that first outer layer of stress is sort of our everyday concern. So stress being, traffic, weather, conflict. Generally speaking, these are things that are remedied fairly easily. They're not persistent, just things that, the things that happen to us every day. Those sort of little things that, we can generally navigate with some ease. When we shift into our second layer, this is where we're experiencing chronic stress. So this is stress that is elevated more than the general stress. So it might be ongoing financial problems, ongoing conflicts that are not easily resolved. We're looking here at more maybe like interpersonal relationship problems. So those types of things that we all certainly experience, but they're not easily remedied. So things that, eventually at some point they do, but they kind of stick with us a little bit longer. So when we move to that third layer, we're looking at secondary traumatic stress. So this type of stress is not necessarily unique to us. It's happening to others around us. And we're experiencing vicarious trauma that comes from hearing or witnessing or just being exposed to traumatic stress that's happening to others. And it's generally, on a regular basis. So we find oftentimes that maybe, healthcare workers, first responders, therapists, people in helping professions are sort of impacted by this. And so, experiencing that type of stress by seeing others in stress impacts us emotionally. And so lastly, we have the traumatic stress, and this is unique to us. This is our own experience about an adverse event that emotionally impacts us, and it generally persists 30 days after the fact. So here we're experiencing increased anxiety, worry, intrusive thoughts, negative memories, dreams, so on and so forth. And it's important to mention that we're not necessarily experiencing at any time one of these things. You may be experiencing one or more or all 4 of these layers of stress. So that kind of changes the way we look at stress a little bit more, as it being just, an all or nothing, or just a general, just an umbrella of stress. There are actually several types. So now that we talked about those 4 layers of stress, we want to think about a different way to look at stress and trauma. And this is within a spectrum of experiences called the stress injury continuum. So the stress injury continuum model allows us to recognize how we're impacted by our stressors, as well as understanding where we're at in any given moment and the support that we need to kind of shift into a more healthier state of being. And so this continuum is helpful because it can not only help us understand our own personal stress and sort of where we need to be, but also the stress of someone else, and provide the appropriate support based on where that person is at in the spectrum. So when we look at stress along this continuum, and we'll kind of get into this a little bit more, but as opposed to just a stagnant or, isolated state of being, it allows us to recognize that just because we're in a certain state at one point does not mean we will stay at that point. So we have the ability to adjust to, whatever we are needing. And so we're going to talk a little bit about stress injuries now and kind of how this can impact us along the continuum. So stress injuries occur, again, along this continuum of experiences. And so if we think about like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, this can be at one very far side of the spectrum. So kind of leading up to that point, though, post-stress and trauma symptoms might be present in a variety of ways before getting to that point. We'll talk a little bit more about that. It's important to note that stress injuries are really similar to physical injuries, as the brain is connected to the body, right? So it's very much mentally and physically happening to us, but this impacts our brain. So we're having an actual, physical injury when we're experiencing a stress injury. And so one way we can tell that we're having a stress injury is that we're experiencing early and late changing vital signs in similar ways that we would experience physical injury. So these are the physiological symptoms, that we might be having leading up to the injury. So think about it in terms of a physical injury. So if we think about say like you're training for a marathon and you're on your long day run. So say like your goal is 12 miles that day. And on mile 10 of the 12 miles, you suddenly feel a pop and your knee starts to hurt, right? So you have a few options at this point. So the first option is you can decide, whoops, didn't want to go that far. Sorry, it kind of all changed there. Okay, so our first option is to decide to ignore that pop and the pain that we're having and just finish. So push through, finish the goal of 12 miles. And the second option is maybe you just want to decide you're done for the day. You want to go home and you're going to massage your knee and walk the last 2 miles, right? So if you decide to keep running, one of two things may happen. One, the pain goes away and you're able to continue training. It happens. I personally have not experienced this. The pain tends to persist and it doesn't disappear, but I think it just depends on where you're at with your, your physical abilities and so on. So if that's the case, great, you can keep pushing through. Or the other option is the pain continues. And if the pain continues, you may try to, be proactive and do things to sort of alleviate those symptoms. So you might ice the knee, elevate it, treat it on your own, or you may decide that you want to go to a doctor or physical therapist and get some elevated care. So just in the same way, we have the same options when it comes to stress injuries. So again, if we recognize those early symptoms, those early signs, so some examples would be anxiety, increased anxiety, hypervigilance, depression, nightmares, so on and so forth, we can choose to ignore those, or we can use coping skills to address them. Likewise, we may actually seek out the help of a professional for assistance if we're no longer able to cope effectively on our own. So in this way, stress injuries are dynamic, just like physical injuries. So they can worsen or improve depending on the way we manage the stress or the level of support that we receive. And it's important to note that stress injuries are more likely to occur when you're already in a state of stress. So thinking back to, those spheres of the 4 layers of stress, you may already be in a state of chronic stress, right? And so when you experience a stress injury, you're more likely to have, a more prolonged or intense injury, if you will, because you're already exposed to stress. Just as if you were physically active, doing a lot of preparations to train for a marathon, your chances of physical injury are higher. Okay, so here is the original model of the stress injury continuum. And it was originally developed for the military and used specifically with sailors and Marines to examine how an individual reacted under stress and if they were considered to be mission ready. So the continuum is color-coded to help identify behaviors that might arise from serving in combat or dangerous peacekeeping missions, as well as the highly charged day-to-day work that's often required of today's military. So when you look at the continuum, it allows you to be in a multitude of different mental stress places. So you're able to see that depending on whatever is going on in your personal or professional life, you can use this to shift within these states. And so by recognizing what state you're in, you can identify not only what you need in any given moment, but you can also ask for support or assistance within that space. So if we're looking specifically, at those 4 different domains, if you will, below each one of those. So if we're looking at the green healthy one, below those are sort of those behaviors, things that we are noticing in ourselves and others that are keeping us in that domain. So for example, the healthy domain, you're seeing like normal mood fluctuations, calm, taking things in stride, physically well, good energy level, so on and so forth. And as we shift along that the continuum, we move over to the reacting domain. And so here below that are those behaviors or noticeable attributes within ourselves or others that tell us we're in a different state of being. And moving on down to injured, and the last being ill. So if for some reason you're wanting to see this, and again, you will definitely have access to this, I'm hoping, if this presentation is recording. But if not, we'll make sure to provide access to this PowerPoint as well. And I'll have my contact information at the end, so you can also access this again. So that specific continuum has since been adapted in a variety of ways, and you can definitely find this online. There's lots of different, I've seen this, lots of adaptations of this. But specifically, this one is, I like this one. This one, I like to think of these as states of being. So we have thriving, surviving, struggling, and in crisis. So this version looks at the concept of going from that in crisis state of being to a state of thriving. So when we begin to understand that, we have these different states, we're able to see that these states are places that we can either briefly sit in, and they're not places that we stay in. So in other words, we shift. And it's important to, yes, we all want to be, in that thriving state of being, and it's definitely a place to aspire to, but it's really hard to just live in this state of being. We can try our best, but we have to practice a little expectation management here and understand that stress is normal. It happens to us on a regular basis, and it can be helpful to see where you're at on that continuum, on a day-by-day basis, and also where others, maybe, team members, coworkers, family members, and also the community, to kind of understand where we're at. Again, it's a place that we briefly sit in and not places that we have to stay in. So understanding that we do shift, and, based on the coping strategies that we have in place and the support systems that we have in place, help us to move back to that thriving state of being. So again, looking below, if we take each column, these are the behaviors that we're wanting to see or more likely to see when we're in these states of being. With thriving, something we might say to ourselves is, I got this. So we're taking things in stride, calm and steady with minor mood fluctuations, because moods shift. That's completely normal. Consistent performance. We're able to take feedback, able to focus, communicate effectively, and those lifestyle factors are normal and, keeping us where we need to be. And as we shift along, moving from left to right, surviving, So something isn't right. You may experience nervousness, increased mood fluctuations, inconsistent performances, easily overwhelmed or irritated, increased need for control, and several others below there. I will just kind of make it a little bit more brief as we go along here. As we get to struggling, when we're in this state of being, we might be thinking, I can't keep this up. So it's definitely elevated up from surviving, right? So here we're experiencing persistent fear, panic, anxiety, anger, pervasive sadness, and hopelessness. Feeling exhausted, chronic exhaustion is a really common one. Poor performance and difficulty making decisions or concentrating. You might be avoiding interaction with coworkers, family, and friends, and fatigue, aches and pains, restlessness, and so on. And when we move into the crisis state of being, this is, the mindset, I can't survive this. And here we're experiencing panic attacks, disabling distress, intrusive thoughts, maybe chronic insomnia, inability to fall asleep, or even to stay asleep. And I also think likewise too, maybe severe depression in somebody that's sleeping a lot. That might also be a behavior that we may notice. Easily enraged or aggressive, carelessness, inability to focus. So again, these are those warning signs that tell us something is not right. Hopefully, if we're getting into, we'll talk more about this towards the end, but if we're getting more into, the orange and red states of being at this point, we're going to need some intervention here. Okay. So why is this continuum important? Why does it matter? Well, I think my personal feeling is that I think that this is a great tool for self-awareness. If we don't have self-awareness, it's really hard to, be proactive, and, instead we're reactive when we're having low self-awareness, right? We're just reacting to the things that are happening. When we build self-awareness and develop that, it allows us to see things, recognize those warning signs, signs that something is off, so that we can use our coping skills and strategies to address them before it becomes a bigger problem. So it's also important that, we use the continuum in a way that we're normalizing what we're feeling and what we are needing, right? So by talking about what we're feeling and where we're at, without judgment and criticism, that, this fear of feeling that we're not enough, we're able to, really promote the notion that mental health is just regular holistic health. It's part of our holistic health. Okay, so the stress injury continuum helps us. It's a tool that helps us talk about it, identify, build that awareness in ourselves so that we can help others as well. And likewise, to reduce the stigma of trauma and stress reactions, right? It's helpful to normalize these things because we all experience, trauma at some point in our lives, and we're all on that continuum. So it helps to reduce the stigma around that. And likewise, it's important to notice, again, building the self-awareness, notice those early and late changing vital signs and symptoms. So again, noticing where we're at on the spectrum, and knowing that that's okay. It's not, the goal is always to be in green. And if you're not in green, you're not doing something right. That's not what it's about at all. It's definitely about understanding that when stress increases, we may move up a little, or we may move a lot on the spectrum. Okay, and again, noticing the signs and symptoms in the same way that we would notice or observe changes, within our physical state of being, or physical injuries, like we talked about before. And likewise, knowing when to get support when we are recognizing those symptoms in ourselves and others. and to increase self-efficacy and resilience. And we'll talk about this here in just a moment. That's our objective. That's the goal here, is to build self-efficacy, which is going to help, promote our beliefs, our personal beliefs, and our abilities to cope, which is the fundamental cornerstone to resilience, right? So, and our ability, knowing that, even in our abilities to know when we need help, that's a huge part of resilience. Okay, so healing from stress injuries. So we need to understand, again, using that self-awareness, what space, where we are within that spectrum, and allow ourselves the grace to look at what we need to shift towards the thriving green space. So when we think of the thriving green space, it's not a space to be permanently living in, but rather a space to constantly go back to, or to maintain to the best of our abilities to stay in that space. And we say this because life happens, right? It can happen at any day. I mean, even with the best, intentions, and, you can be off to a great start or not, things happen. We're running late to meetings, weather changes, forgetting your wallet, your cell phone, etc. These are all events that stress us out, upset us. But at the same time, if we have that self-awareness, understanding where we're at and what we need, we can work towards moving back to or staying in the green mindset. Okay, so some of those actions, again, moving towards actionable things that we can do to get us back there. So these are the things that keep us in green, right? So focusing on the task at hand. So again, thinking about, what it is that we need to do, but not doing all the things, right? So thinking about what we're able to control ultimately, and what needs to be done, what's priority right now, instead of seeing everything, seeing the big picture, and not thinking about those little manageable pieces. So again, moving on to the next point, breaking problems into manageable chunks. So not trying to take it all on at once, problem solving in a way that we're taking, pieces that we are able to manage, and ultimately within our control. And identifying those support systems that we have. So, whether that's family, friends, social networks, whatever it is that keeps us grounded, things that we're doing currently to kind of keep us in that green space. And maintaining healthy lifestyle. So I was a former personal trainer of 17 years, and this is like my favorite one to talk about, right? If we're doing the things that are helping us feel healthier and better about ourselves, it just naturally is going to extend to other domains of our life. And so when we're in that yellow zone, so again, thinking about yellow as that surviving state of being, right? So just outside of thriving, now we're surviving. The actions that we want to take here to get us back to green, recognizing limits, getting adequate rest, food, exercise, again, those lifestyle factors, engaging in healthy coping strategies, and identifying and minimizing stressors. So to me, that is about, again, focusing on getting to the facts, what it is what is causing the stress. And minimizing can be thought of as, maybe thinking about putting things back into perspective, right? So not necessarily letting our emotions control our thinking, but really sort of, getting more objective with our thoughts and thinking about, what it is exactly that's causing the stress. And that helps us to be in a mindset where we can take action. And in that orange state of being, this was struggling. If we think back to that continuum. And so the actions here that we want to take is to identify and understand our own signs of distress. So again, building that self-awareness, really, looking at the signs, understanding that these are unique to us, and that, we're struggling here. So we're definitely needing help. This may be talking with someone, seeking out help. It could be within your social support, as well as external resources. So the primary focus here is not withdrawing, but, now reaching out and getting some additional support, as well as doing all the other things, right, that we would normally do to keep us in the green zone. And again, our in crisis red zone here, without question, we really want to be focused on, whether it's for ourselves or for others, seeking consultation from physical or mental health providers, following their plan of care. Again, so still using all of our coping skills, our coping resources, but now focusing on the plan of care and regaining our physical and mental health. So when we talk about coping, it's important to remember that there's a variety of ways to cope. And there's no right or wrong way to do that as long as it's healthy, right? But it's important to know that coping skills, self-care, boundaries, all of these things are unique to you or to the person that we're trying to help. So it's what works for you, not what works for others. And I think sometimes that, especially for those folks that may be in helping professions, or even if you're part of a support network for others, it's natural to want to help and say, hey, this works for me. This is what you should do. And, that may or may not be helpful, but it's important to find out, what works for you, what works for that other person when we're looking at, taking these actionable strategies. So an example of this would be, thinking about, maybe somebody enjoys, maybe I enjoy reading nonfiction. And so I'm telling everyone, you need to read this book because this really helped me. And, that may or may not be helpful to somebody else, but the skill of reading itself could be a coping skill that could be really helpful, but it's about the genre of books that person enjoys. It's going to work for them. So that's one way to look at it. And so in any case, the point is that there's lots of strategies. Again, no right or wrong strategy as long as it's a healthy strategy. And some of those are listed there below the arrow. Seeking support and social connections, connecting with a cause that feels meaningful, making self-care a priority, taking a break from technology or news, really nourishing your creative side, scheduling breaks in your day, engaging in mindfulness, setting small goals, and growing your self-efficacy. So again, those are all great coping strategies, but they're going to look different for each person. And here's, as we're sort of wrapping up, the goal, as I said just a few slides back, is really to build the self-efficacy. And when we talk about self-efficacy, it's the belief in an individual's ability to achieve their goals. So their abilities to do that. And self-efficacy is definitely something that it's a process, right? It's like anything. And it's a skill that, takes time to build. And there's several ways that we can build our self-efficacy or help others build their self-efficacy. And so the 4 ways that we do this are important because they all sort of work together, not necessarily just one of these, but they all sort of work in tandem to build our self-efficacy. And again, that relates to our beliefs and our ability to cope, achieve goals, and be more overall resilient people. And so the first way we do this is mastery experience. And so this is when we overcome a challenge, a personal challenge, or we learn a new skill. And in this way, we're doing the work. We're going through the experience to get the skills that we need to overcome, potential future challenges. The next way that we do this is vicarious learning. And this is when we learn from others' experiences. So this can be by, watching somebody else go through something or overcome a challenge, and we're seeing them do it. So that's helping us to leverage that experience for ourselves. And social persuasion is when others cheer us on and motivate us And so we're taking those folks and we're listening to those folks. We want, our cheerleaders. And so we're using that to, again, leverage our abilities in the moment in situations where maybe we haven't experienced, those challenges before. We have, and, we want to, still effectively navigate that. And the last one there is managing our own psychological state. And so that's, managing or coping with sadness, anxiety, anger, or other emotions. So self-efficacy plays a large role in our overall resilience as well as our coping style. So that's important, again, when we talked about the different coping strategies, some folks may navigate towards certain coping styles and others, do things entirely different, and that's okay. Again, it's just our belief in our abilities to do that. So if we were successful previously navigating certain challenges, chances are we'll probably be doing the same types of, things again, the same coping behaviors. And self-efficacy helps us estimate our own capacity. So again, the belief in our ability to achieve goals, to overcome challenges, as well as regulate our emotional state. So again, if we know that we've done it before, we can do it again. We have the tools and abilities to do that. So again, just kind of going back to this concept of running a marathon, it's important to understand that, building resilience and navigating stress, again, along that continuum, it takes a lot of, it's a process. It takes a lot of practice. Nobody navigates stress perfectly. And it's a process of learning what works and what doesn't work, in the same way that, we would plan for running a marathon. So if we think about, the concept of, crawling, walking, and then running, we can also apply this to, the way we navigate stress and, traumatic stress. It's definitely a process. So, we don't just start, if we're planning on running a marathon, we just don't start running the marathon. Instead, we would get the necessary tools to be able to run the marathon, come up with a plan, and slowly but steadily progress forward in accomplishing and achieving our goals, right? So again, breaking it up into pieces, making it more manageable instead of, this really, overwhelming feeling that we have to do all these things. So thinking about navigating stress in a similar way can be helpful. So that is the end of this presentation, and I appreciate your attendance today in this third session in our series of coming together as a community, building resilience after tragedy. And we have an additional, or last rather, session, fourth and final session, Pathways to Healing and Mindfulness. And this will happen next Monday, the 19th at noon. Likewise, you're welcome to find out more about our institute at resilience.uccs.edu. And I'm happy to chat more, or any questions or comments you have about this presentation, I'd be happy to talk about. If not, I wish you a good rest of your day, and I really sincerely appreciate your attendance, and hopefully this recorded so that we can post this for the community. But as I mentioned before, if you do want a copy of this PowerPoint, or you would like more information, my contact information is there, and I'd be happy to do that as well.